Shalom. So today I was going to talk to you about a question that has come up several times in the last couple of weeks. And usually when I have the same issue come up repeatedly, I take that to be the Father's way of letting me know that this is a subject that I should look at and discuss and try to look at it from the perspective of what would Yeshua do. And so this video is about gun rights. Would Yeshua's government, would it support the concept of gun rights? In America, we call this the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment is the clause in the Constitution that protects the pre-existent right to keep and bear arms. So, my nation was founded on this principle that our rights come from the Creator. According to the Constitution, we hold these truths to be self-evident. So in other words, this truth is something that does not need to be explained or defended. It should just be self-evident that men are created equal and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. So if you have an unalienable right, that means it's a right that you can't give away. It is part of your being. It was given to you by the Creator, and because it was given to you by the Creator, we do not have the right to refuse it. Now, we do have the right not to exercise it. Just because you have a right to keep and bear arms does not mean that you have to bear arms necessarily. But it is a choice that you have. Now, as we get into this a little bit deeper, we will see some evidence that I don't know that this is really even optional, because even though in some respect I see it as a choice, I also believe that we are commanded to protect our lives. And if that requires you to keep and bear arms, then it's no longer an option. It's something we are required to do. But that I'll let you make that decision for yourself. So we're endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these, now notice this is not all inclusive. It just says among these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. And whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter, abolish it, and to institute new government. Okay, so notice here that the purpose of government is not to give us free health care. It's not to tax us. It's not to build roads. It's not to raise armies. The purpose of government is to secure our rights, not to infringe our rights, not to take them away, not to give us rights. See, our rights come from the Creator. The right to keep and bear arms pre-existed the Constitution and the Second Amendment, and because we are all the product of the same Creator, these rights are inherent in all human beings, not just the ones in America. Of course, this is according to the founder's view, and I would say it's according to my view also. I believe that all human beings are endowed by their Creator with unalienable rights, and that among these is the right to keep and bear arms, which would fall under the right to life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. All of those rights are protected by the right to keep and bear arms. And again, here is the actual text of the Second Amendment. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, the introductory clause, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. This is not talking about the National Guard. This is not talking about the Army. Communist nations have armies that have weapons. The militia is the citizenry. It is the same thing. It's like the posse that you see in the Wild West, where the sheriff will get together a group of citizens, deputize them, and they'll go out in defense of the community, usually going after a criminal that is a danger to the community. Same thing with the militia. That's the purpose of the militia. It is every able-bodied man who's old enough to defend his family. We're all part of the militia, whether we realize it or not. So, this does not apply. This is not a right given to the government. This is a right of the people, and it's not given by the government. It is protected by the government. Should be protected by the government. Now, of course, the government is knee-deep in the business of infringing that which shall not be infringed. And so the government has become destructive to the ends to which it was established. However, that being said, this is not, there are no constitutional rights. There are no rights given by the Constitution. There are only rights protected by the Constitution that were given before the Constitution was ever ratified. So it's not, so even though, some of you who are in foreign countries may be saying, well, why are you even discussing this? Because I don't live in America. Well, it's because it's my channel and I do live in America, and this is something that I believe reflects my own beliefs, is that we have this right. Government does not grant a right. Government just protects a right that was already granted by the Creator. And it doesn't matter where you live. That is the case. So, why do we have these rights? Why would the Creator give us these rights? Why would the founders of my nation protect these rights? Well, the first reason is because tyrants always disarm the people. The right to keep and bear arms is always infringed in totalitarian governments. So if that right is never infringed, then it greatly reduces the chance that any government will devolve into tyranny. 1 Samuel 15:19. Now no blacksmith could be found in all the land of Israel, for the Philistines said, lest the Hebrews make swords or spears. And all of Israel went down to the Philistines, each one to sharpen his plowshare and his mattocks, and his axe and his sickle. And it came to be on the day of battle that there was neither sword nor spear found in the hand of any of the people who were with Shaul and Jonathan, but they were found with Shaul and Jonathan his son. So the only people that had a weapon at this time was King Saul and his son Jonathan. And the reason is because they were under control of the Philistines, and the Philistines had disarmed the people. And the only way that the Hebrews could even get a blade, a sharp blade, was to go to the Philistines to get these implements. This is something you can see reflected in the state of the world today. Again, I know this is very America-centric in my presentation today, but again, this is where I live, so this is what my worldview is. Today, if I want to purchase a firearm, I have to go to the Philistines and apply for permission. You have to go to the gun store and you have to send off your information to the government, and then they will either approve or infringe upon that which is not supposed to be infringed upon. So I have to go to the Philistines in order to get a sharp sickle. And of course, the weapons that we are allowed to have are not the same as the government is allowed to have. Now, that was not the intention of the framers of the Constitution. Their intention was that we should have access to the same weapons as any government agency. So even these, terrifying AR-15s that everybody talks about, they're still not the full automatic 3-round burst M16A2 version that the military has. So in the same way that the Philistines were regulating what types of blades that the Hebrews could have, the federal government today, the Philistines that rule over this nation, are doing the same thing. Like, you can have a little, 40 caliber pistol, you can have a semi-automatic rifle, but you certainly cannot have the full automatic rifle without jumping through plenty of loopholes and hoops to get and pay excessive amounts of taxes, which again, a tax is an infringement, in order to have these weapons that we are supposed to have a God-given right to have. So this is all part of reducing the people's power over government. This is the beginning of the way tyranny forms, is that it starts off small and gradually increases. The book of Judges, chapter 3, verse 14, you see this episode where Ehud has to make a sword. Now, why does he have to make a sword? Again, they are under foreign occupation by the Moabites, and the reason Ehud had to make his own sword was obviously because he did not have access to swords. It would be no different. There are people out there, you can see YouTube videos and stuff of people that took pipes and other types of equipment and made their own homemade firearms and stuff like that. It would be the same as if that's the only thing you have access for or to. Most people that do that kind of thing are just doing it as a type of project or whatever. They're not doing it because they have to. But you see here that Ehud had to make himself a sword. He had to go out and do it himself, because I believe the implication is that their right to keep and bear arms had been infringed because they were under tyrannical rule. This is the way that people are kept in subjugation. So here is an example from our modern day history. Adolf Hitler in 1935. This year will go down in history. For the first time, a civilized nation has full gun registration. Our streets will be safer, our police more efficient, and the world will follow our lead into the future. Now, this is something that you could picture coming out of the mouth of a politician in California, or some liberal gun-grabbing state. Notice he mentions gun registration. Anytime you register something, if you look up the legal definition of registration and you read between the lines a little bit on it, you'll see that what it actually is that you are giving possession, or you're giving ownership of something to someone else. So when you register your car, you notice that you don't get a title to your car. You get a certificate of title. It's not the same thing as a title. So we call it the title. I got the title to my car, whatever. People say that, but that's not accurate. In reality, you have a certificate of title. And at the top of the title, it says state of whatever, state of Tennessee, state of Alabama, state of California is at the top of the certificate of title. And that is because the state has the title. You gave the title, you gave ownership of your vehicle to the state. Now, you may not realize that. You just think that, they're keeping up with it because they're so benevolent. But in reality, you just gave ownership of the vehicle that you bought and paid for to the state. You retain possession of it and use of it. So the state is generous enough to allow you to retain use of the car that you paid for and then gave to the state when you registered your car. That's what registration means. So when you register your firearms, it's the same thing. You're giving ownership of your firearm to the state. And at any given time, the state can choose to take possession of their firearm. Just like at any time, the state can choose to take possession of their vehicle. If you don't pay your taxes, that's why they can impound what you think is your car. That's why you have to pay that road tax to use your car on your roads that you paid for with your tax dollars that went to what used to be your government. It's all a scam. You don't know that you're giving ownership of your car to them when you register. You don't know that you're giving ownership of your guns to them when you register. But the thing is, that's why anytime a government registers guns, they end up confiscating guns, because you just gave them the legal authority to do that. So this is Adolf Hitler in 1935. Adolf Hitler, the plan, he says, here it is 2 years earlier in 1933, to conquer a nation, first disarm its citizens. So this is 33, 35, he registers all the firearms, and then, the rest is history. One of the most infamous genocides in history was committed after Hitler had confiscated all these registered firearms. And it's not just Hitler. Millions of people. I think the total is somewhere around the neighborhood of 270 million people in the 20th century were murdered by governments because they had no weapons to defend themselves. The number one unnatural cause of death in the world is government. It is not heart disease. It is, it's not petty gun crime. It is government. It's what kills more people than anything else. Okay, so we also see in the Exodus. Now, in this episode in the Exodus, Joshua is fighting against Amalek. And Yeshua is giving his blessing or his authority to Moses. And so Moses is standing on top of the mountain. Joshua is doing the fighting, but Moses is the one up there interceding. And he's got Aaron and Hur holding up his hands, so that when Moses' hands are held up, the battle goes in the favor of Israel. So where did they get the victory from? Well, Yeshua gave them the victory, but it required Joshua to be down there actually doing the action. The Hebrews didn't drop their weapons and say, okay, Yeshua's going to defend us. The Hebrews went down there and fought against Amalek, but they trusted that Yeshua was giving them the power and the authority and the favor to win this battle. So even though Yeshua brought them the victory was brought at the hands of Joshua and the other soldiers of Israel. David and Goliath. David comes out against Goliath and says that he is going to obtain the victory from Yeshua, that Yeshua is going to give him the victory. And so David credited the victory against Goliath to Yeshua, but David was the one that took the sword of the Philistine and cut off his head. David was the one that put the stone in the sling. But it was Yeshua working through the actions of David that brought the victory. Goliath stood down there and taunted the Israelites day after day. Yeshua didn't hit him with the lightning bolt. It wasn't until a Hebrew stood up and took authority in the situation and destroyed Goliath. Yeshua could have, at any time, he could have caused a meteor to fall and kill Goliath. There's probably a million different ways that Yeshua could have acted alone and destroyed Goliath. But he didn't do that until David took up his weapons and went down there and gained the victory. It's the same thing with Joshua's long day. Yeshua was throwing down hailstones and killing the people of the land that Joshua was fighting against, but Joshua was still down there fighting. Same thing when David's men were fighting against Absalom. The victory was given by Yeshua, but it took David's army to go down there and fight Absalom to gain the victory. There's dozens of examples of this in Scripture, where there was a force of evil came against the people of Israel, and the people of Israel fought, but they fought prayerfully, and they fought to defend themselves, and Yeshua gave them the victory. the men were not credited with the victory. It was always Yahuwah working through the men. We can even see that in the history of the founding of my nation, where we had a weaker force, the colonists, the militia, fighting against this well-trained, superior fighting force of the British Army, and yet we were given the victory. In fact, sometimes there's documented cases of weather changes and things like that gave the colonists the victory. Reinforcements couldn't make it into the battle for the other side because of storms or tornadoes or whatever it was, but there was intervention from the Most High that gained this nation its freedom. So Yahuwah is directly involved in the rising up of kings and the throwing kings down, but ultimately our freedom is won through our actions, working with the blessing of Yahuwah. Matthew 25:49. So we have this verse, all who take up the sword shall die by the sword. So what's basically happening is this is after the Last Supper, when Yeshua and his disciples are up on the Mount of Olives, and this army comes out against Yeshua. Actually, it's not an army, it's more like a posse, but these men come from the high priests to take him captive. Judas kisses him on the cheek, and then Kepha draws his sword and cuts off the ear of the servant of the high priest. And Yeshua heals his ear, but says to Kepha, put your sword away, for all who take up the sword shall die by the sword. Or do you think that I'm not able to pray to my Father now, and he shall provide me more than 12 legions of messengers? How then would the scriptures be filled that it has to be this way? And in that hour Yeshua said to the crowds, have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs to arrest me? Daily I sat with you teaching in the set apart place, and you did not seize me. So there's several things going on here. But people focus on this, all who take up the sword shall die by the sword. So is that something that we should live by in every single situation? Or is Yeshua speaking to a particular instance here? Notice the next verse that Yeshua says, look, I'm capable of defending myself. I don't need, the point of the verse is that he does not need Kepha to defend him. Yeshua can ask for heavenly messengers to be sent, and they will save him themselves. But the reason that he's allowing this to happen in the next verse is so that the scriptures will be fulfilled. There's a purpose for this. And then we have this other reference about coming out against a robber with swords and clubs. And we'll see as we go on that's actually because the reason Yeshua says that is because that's actually an appropriate time to use a weapon, is to defend yourself from a thief. You don't have to be a victim. You don't have to stand there and let yourself be assaulted. You are authorized. You are given the right by Yahuwah to defend yourself, and we'll see that a little bit further. So notice that in some of my teachings, I talk about this concept of righteousness and justice in the ancient Near East. And there are numerous. I've done several presentations on it. You can watch those presentations and you'll see just verse after verse after verse after verse detailing what this concept of justice and righteousness is. But essentially, it is to destroy the oppressor and to defend those who cannot defend themselves. That is the concept of righteousness and justice. You defend the people that cannot defend themselves and destroy their oppressor. Now, Kepha was attempting to defend Yeshua, but Yeshua's answer was, I'm capable of defending myself. So, should we take up the sword to defend our neighbor, I believe we should, and I believe that the reason that Yeshua rebuked Kepha was because that wasn't what's going on here. In Kepha's point of view, Yeshua needed to be defended, but Yeshua refutes that. And if we look at the same incident in the other Gospels, we don't see this reference about he who lives by the sword will die by the sword. But we do see this instance of this reference about, have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs? Is mentioned in Mark. It's mentioned in Luke. So notice in Exodus 22:2, the thief, if he's found breaking in, then we are given a right to fight against him. And if the thief dies because he's attempting to steal from us, there's no guilt for his bloodshed because he took that upon himself. So that's probably the source of Yeshua's words about coming out as against a robber. But just before this incident occurs, just before he rebuked Kepha, in the Gospel of Luke gives you some more details about this whole incident. It says that Yeshua said to them, when I sent you without purse and bag and sandals, did you lack anything? And the people answered, no, nothing at all. And then he says to them, but now let him who has a purse take it, likewise also a bag, and let him who has no sword sell his garment and buy one. So there's a change of instructions here. And so now Yeshua is telling them when they go out, when they travel, that they need to carry a weapon with them. In fact, he even puts the importance of carrying a weapon above the importance of having a cloak on your back. He says, for I say to you that what has been written has yet to be accomplished in me, and he was reckoned with the lawless ones. For that which refers to me has an end too. And they said, Master, look, here are 2 swords. And he said to them, that's enough. So Yeshua's disciples were armed. You know, when he mentions this to them, they're like, well, we've already got 2 weapons. So, you know, there's if you look at who Yeshua's disciples were, his disciples bore these names, these nicknames and cognomens that seem to be indicative of them being members of the Zealot party. And the Zealots were a subset of the Essenes. Now we can read that in Josephus and Hippolytus. They tell us that the Essenes had a subset of Zealots. Some of them were called the Sicarii. So when you see like Judas Iscariot itself is just a corruption of the word Sicarii. You have like Simon the Zealot, which indicates that at least some of his apostles were zealots, and this nickname, the Sons of Thunder. Well, that's a zealot reference there too. So there's numerous disciples that are associated somewhat with the Zealot party. In fact, even the name Galileans, you can look in the history of the Jews, and Josephus' writing, and he'll talk about this man, Judas the Galilean, and that these people that were Galileans, that's another name for the Zealots. It doesn't mean that every person from Galilee was a Zealot, but the two were associated together, the Zealots and the Galileans. It was a lot of these Zealots had their home bases up in Galilee. And of course, who else is Galilee associated with? Well, it's associated heavily with Yeshua. When Paul goes to meet with James and the other disciples in Jerusalem in the book of Acts, and James confronts Paul about these rumors that Paul is teaching against the Torah. Rumors which, of course, we know from Paul's letters are true. And so James, what does he say? He says, do you not see that we have myriads of believers here that are zealous for the Torah? We have myriads of zealots here, is what he's saying. That's why when Paul went into the temple, he was almost killed. He was almost killed by this zealot faction of believers. So it's a little contrary to what we see, the picture that we get from the pulpit, and in some instances from the gospel, where you have this kind of very passive Yeshua. But all of his people that he hung around with had reputations of not being quite so passive. And so to say that Yeshua is against people defending themselves with a weapon if necessary, I believe that position is untenable. Again, in the Gospel of John, put your sword in the sheath. Shall I not drink the cup which my Father has given to me? So there is no reference to this, live by the sword, die by the sword in John. But again, the point of the matter is that the reason Yeshua is saying to put the sword away is not because he's against swords per se, but because he's against Kepha defending him, because Yeshua's got to fulfill this mission given to him by the Father. The Didache. Now, this is a work that many believers are not really familiar with. Now, what it is it is a document that dates back to, some scholars date it back to the 40s Common Era. It was a short, like if you have a print version of it, it's usually only 15 pages long or so. But it is basically like a handbook for new congregations. And this is something put together by the apostles using the instructions given to them by Yeshua. In fact, the full name for this document, Didache just means teaching. The full name for the document is something to the effect of the teachings of Yeshua to his 12 apostles for the nations, or for the Gentiles. So this is instructions given by Yeshua to his disciples, for his disciples to then turn around and give to us, the believers that they go out and recruit in the congregations that they establish. Chapter 16, verse 1 says, "Watch over your own life. Do not allow your lights to be extinguished and your belts to be without a weapon. But you must be ready, because you do not know the hour in which our Master comes." So this whole concept that you see in the church of where we don't have to defend ourselves, we don't have to get involved with any kind of conflict, because when the Antichrist comes, we're all going to get raptured out, or whatever their theology is exactly. It's not tenable when you look at what Yeshua taught his disciples to teach us. What the disciples were teaching, the people that lived, ate, drank, slept with Yeshua, they were saying that what he taught them was that we do not let our belt be without a weapon. And the reason is, the purpose is to watch over our own life. It's not to go out and make war with someone else. It's not to go out and attack someone that's not attacking you, but it is for self-defense purposes only. And the way that this verse is written, to me, it sounds like a command. This is the way we are told to live. We are to be ready to defend ourselves. Now, if you live in a peaceful country, it may be that you don't have to carry a weapon with you everywhere you go. Personally, I do. About the only place that you'll find me without a weapon on is when I'm at work. And that's because I'm just not allowed to carry there. But if you were to see me out at the grocery store or out at Walmart or something like that, I've got a concealed carry permit. And, I'm usually armed, probably 90% of the time. Never had to use my gun, and I pray that I never have to. But it's there just in case. Matthew 24:43. "Know this, the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come. He would have watched and not allowed his house to be broken into." Now, how are you going to prevent a thief from breaking into your house? If a man comes into your house with a gun and he is wanting to rob your house, how are you going to prevent that if you're not armed yourself? Because of this, be ready too, for the son of Adam is coming in an hour when you do not expect him. Who then is a trustworthy and wise servant, whom his master shall set over his household to give them food in season? So the good, the trustworthy and wise servant takes care of the people of the house. The evil servant, though, says, my master's delaying his coming, and begins to beat his fellow servants and eat and drink with the drunkards. So there's this contrast here between the wise and trustworthy servant and the evil servant. The trustworthy servant will defend the other members of the household. The evil servant will abuse the other members of the household. Again, in John, the thief does not come but to steal, to slaughter, and to destroy. I have come that they might possess life, and that they might possess it beyond measure. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep, but the hireling, not being a shepherd, one who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees. And the wolf snatches the sheep and scatters them. So again, you see this lazy servant, or this servant that is wicked, abandons his brothers. He doesn't defend the sheep. He leaves, and the wolf gets them. So if somebody's coming against a brother, if you're out somewhere and you witness a crime being committed, someone's attacking another person, and you allow that attack to continue, who are you in this scenario? Are you the hireling, or are you the good shepherd? Are we not supposed to imitate Yeshua? Are we not supposed to love one another the way that he has loved us? So if he would defend his sheep, why would we not? Why would we abandon our brother? Josephus, when he writes about the Essenes, he says that when they travel, they take their weapons with them for fear of thieves. Again, you see this reference to thieves. Same thing on Hippolytus. The Essenes, they carry nothing but arms when they travel. I've made previous videos about my belief is that the Essenes are the Nazarenes. The Essenes were there before Yeshua ever appeared on the scene in human form. And after Yeshua came, the Essenes continued to be called Essenes, but they were also called Nazarenes because they followed Yeshua, the Nazarene. That's the name of my channel, David Ha-Notzeri. Well, Notzarim were the Nazarenes. That's the Hebrew word for Nazarenes. Plural. So singular is Notzari or Notzeri. So that's where the name of my channel comes from. So these Essenes / Nazarenes, just like Yeshua commanded them to do, Josephus lived after Yeshua. And he, according to his testimony, tells us that the Essenes were still following these instructions that we saw Yeshua give in the Gospel of Luke just before Judas appeared on the Mount of Olives, to carry a weapon with them when they travel. The same commandment that's given in the Didache. Don't let your belt be without a weapon. So people have said that we shouldn't defend ourselves. And so this is actually the second version of this video. I made a previous video on this subject, and one of the comments that someone had posted about it reminded me of a movie that I saw back in, a couple years ago. The movie was made in 1953. The name of the movie is Shane, and it's about a gunfighter in the Wild West that came to basically kind of get out of the whole, gunslinging business, and so he's retiring to a quiet town, and he's hoping that no one will recognize him. He just wants to get out and just be a farmer or a ranch hand or whatever. And the subject of guns comes up. So I'll let you listen to this clip. It's pretty short.
Guns aren't going to be my boy's life.
A gun is a tool, Miriam. No better, no worse than any other tool. An axe, a shovel, or anything. A gun is as good or as bad as the man using it.
And that's the truth. A gun is a tool. And you can use it for good purposes or you can use it for wicked purposes. But a tool is not evil. A tool is a tool. And people will say, well, I'm not going to carry a gun because I trust that Yeshua will keep me safe. Well, tell me something. Those of you that trust that Yeshua will keep you safe, do you wear a seatbelt in the car? If you go out on a lake, do you put a life jacket on? Or if you have small children with you, would you put a life jacket on them to keep them from drowning if they fell off the boat? When you travel, do you have a spare tire in your trunk? Do you do any of these as a precaution just in case you need them? Because the same people that say that I won't carry a gun because I trust that Yahuwah is going to protect me and I don't need to be prepared to defend myself, well, they still buckle their seatbelt. Does that mean that they don't have faith that Yahuwah will keep them out of an accident? Well, I don't buckle my seatbelt because I know that Yahuwah is not going to allow me to have a wreck. No, they buckle their children up. They'll strap a life jacket on their kids if they go to the lake or to the river. They'll make sure that the spare tire in their trunk is aired up and ready to go in case they have a flat on a dark, deserted highway. It doesn't mean that they don't trust in Yahuwah. It just means that they're prepared. So weapons in and of themselves are not wicked. They're a tool. And to say that you can't use a tool to defend your own life is insanity. To say that you can't prepare for an emergency, that you can't defend yourself against a thief, that's insane. It's insane. Why would you think that the Creator would want you to be a victim of thievery? If a thief comes against you with murderous intent, and you believe that Yahuwah would want you not to defend your own life, does that not make Yahuwah the agent of the thief? The defender of the thief above his own people? That's an untenable position. I don't care what kind of religious doctrine you've been taught your life. That is insanity. That's ascribing evil, wickedness to Yahuwah to think that he would want you, a good person, to be destroyed and killed by a wicked person. So thank you for listening. I know that some will disagree with me, but just like all my videos, I'm not just looking at one or two verses in Scripture. I'm looking at all the references in Scripture, all the examples. I'm looking at what Kepha tells us in the Nazarene Acts. And I look at, what does history tell us? What do we know about the Essenes? What do we know about the Nazarenes? What do we know about what the disciples taught? All of this information should be used when we consider any subject. Not just the letters of Paul, not just one verse in the Gospels that only appears in one Gospel and none of the others, and seems to be contrary to what history teaches us. But if you look at what Yeshua says immediately after, then there is no conflict. There is no, difference. Yeshua was telling Kepha not to defend him with the sword because he was not being oppressed. He was not having his life taken from him. He was laying it down, and that's different. So, thank you for listening. Have a blessed Shabbat and Shalom.